Bigger, better, faster, more. The first sequel to any popular genre movie tends to follow that very simple checklist, and not many successfully ticked all those boxes, quite like Mad Max 2: The Road Warrior. Released 2 years after the handcrafted, low-budget original Mad Max raced onto screens in 1979, The Road Warrior was a different experience for visionary filmmaker George Miller than his first go-around. No longer hampered by limited resources and budgetary restrictions, Miller was able to execute more dazzling, audacious set pieces and action sequences that eluded him in the first film. Despite the financial leeway that gave Miller creative freedom, making The Road Warrior was still not a smoothly paved escapade. We're not just here for the gasoline, we're about to find out what the f*** happened to this movie. Following the massive record-setting success of Mad Max upon its release in 1979, writer-director George Miller was flooded with a slew of Hollywood offers, including the Sylvester Stallone classic First Blood. But Miller turned down the Rambo movie to instead make a rock and roll musical titled Roxanne, possibly after the hit song by the Police. And he reunited with writer Terry Hayes after they collaborated on the novelization of Mad Max. But the script for the Rock project was put on the back burner while Miller and Hayes redirected their focus on a Mad Max sequel. Miller felt that making another Max with more money would allow him to achieve what he could not the first time, where he felt that he ultimately had no control over the final product. While the first Mad Max was partially inspired by silent Buster Keaton and Harold Lloyd movies, The Road Warrior was influenced by the work of filmmaker Akira Kurosawa, psychoanalyst Carl Jung, and Joseph Campbell's The Hero with a Thousand Faces, along with the hyper-violence of Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange. The story also parallels the classic western Shane, as seen through Max's relationship with the feral kid. Miller, Hayes, and co-writer Brian Hannant fleshed out the screenplay, with Hannant also serving as first AD and second unit director. Mad Max 2 was fueled up with a $4.5 million budget, more than 10 times what Miller had to work with on the original Mad Max, making the sequel the most expensive Australian movie production when it was made in 1981, and therefore a risky investment at the time. Miller claims the sequel was written and released within 1 calendar year, which would certainly be a far shorter journey than the long and winding Fury Road, which took 12 years from script to theaters. Miller's second trip in the post-apocalypse took 12 weeks to complete principal photography, around the same time as the original. Looking at the expanded scope of the sequel, it's hard to believe The Road Warrior was made as fast and furiously as its predecessor. Despite the hot, sweaty appearance of the sun-scorched wasteland, The Road Warrior was filmed during the Australian winter and was extremely cold. Returning star Mel Gibson would bundle up beneath blankets as soon as his scenes were filmed, despite wearing a leather outfit. The bikers wearing assless chaps also suffered from the extreme temperature. Vernon Wells, who plays mohawked marauder Wes, was given the nickname Barometer Bum by Gibson due to his backside constantly turning purple in the frigid conditions. The filming location of Australia's Broken Hill was also chosen based on weather forecasts, which predicted very little rainfall. However, the production had to be shut down for 1 whole week when it began downpouring for the first time in 4 years. The Road Warrior was also shot almost entirely in sequence, a rarity for an action movie. For his director of photography, Miller hired Dean Semler, who would later return to the area in 1984 to film Russell Mulcahy's landmark Australian creature feature, Razorback. Miller was so gung-ho about capturing visceral footage that he initially dressed in costume and controlled a car-mounted camera rig from inside a vehicle. But Miller flubbed the timing on the first take and was immediately replaced with a camera operator. Miller and Semler also utilized steel-reinforced remote-control cameras called Ned Kellys, named for the impenetrable armor worn by the infamous Aussie outlaw. While Max Rokitansky's relationship with his Australian cattle dog makes for some memorable movie moments, the dog was actually found at a nearby pound just 1 day before he was scheduled to be euthanized. The dog was quickly trained to perform for the movie, and was fitted with special earplugs to stifle the loud car engines. Unlike their on-screen interactions, the dog also got along quite well with actor Bruce Spence, who plays the excitable comic relief Gyro Captain. And while life can be harsh in the wasteland, the dog himself had a happy ending, getting adopted by a camera operator after filming wrapped. Thanks to the extended budget, the oil refinery settlement marked the most expensive set ever built for an Australian movie. Appropriately, the detonation of the refinery during the climax was also the biggest explosion in the history of Australian cinema at the time. Done under the supervision of the Australian Army, the blast was so gigantic that airlines had to be notified beforehand. The movie's imposing antagonist, Lord Humongous,
the Ayatollah of rock and roller,
was originally envisioned to be Jim Goose, Max's charred partner from the first film. Although some clues, like his MFP police minions, seem to indicate this linkage, Miller later stated the character had been a military man who may have served with settlement leader Papa Gallo, a possible connection that deepens the villain's frustration with the refinery's resistance. The grungy leather-clad costumes worn by most of the Marauders were inspired by S&M attire. Much of the clothing was found at local thrift shops, junk stores, sporting outlets, and garage sales. As for Max's rough appearance, it was largely Mel Gibson's idea to grow stubble and shaggy hair and rip his jacket sleeve and gloves to give Max a more rugged and uncivilized look. Gibson also only speaks 16 lines of dialogue in the entire film, including the mission statement,
"I'm just here for the gasoline."
Max's V8 Interceptor is the same car Gibson drove in the original film. After Mad Max wrapped production, the vehicles were intended to be destroyed, but the V8 Interceptor was deemed too iconic to scrap. Once Mad Max 2 was announced, the Interceptor was tracked down and recycled for the sequel. The original model of Pursuit Special, a 1973 Ford XB Falcon GT351, was modified for the sequel for interior close-ups of Max driving inside the vehicle, and a second was utilized for chase sequences and was deliberately destroyed for Max's attempted escape from the Marauders. Much like the original Mad Max, the Road Warrior holds up thanks to incredible practical effects and genuinely death-defying stunt work. The film features more than 200 stunts, and over 80 custom vehicles were utilized during the production, with roughly half of them demolished by the end of filming.
Before we continue with our video, here's a reminder to click the Store tab on any of our JoBlo channels and browse our collection of the latest and freshest designs in our merch store. Go get you some.
Miller would occasionally drop frames to increase the sense of velocity, but for the most part, the vehicles were all filmed at speed. Clever framing was also used for road scenes where no movement would be seen in the background, capturing those shots while the vehicles were stationary. One of the most notorious vehicular mishaps occurred when a motorcycling marauder somersaults through the air during the final tanker chase. Due to a miscalculation, stunt performer Guy Norris nearly lost his life when he crashed and shattered his leg on impact, which is the shot used in the final film. The injury and brush with death didn't discourage Norris, who reunited with Miller on several occasions to act as stunt coordinator, including on Fury Road and Furiosa. When shooting the oil tanker scenes, Mel Gibson had to be replaced with a stunt driver because he did not know how to operate the manual quad-box transmission. The stunt driver would accelerate the vehicle, then duck out of the camera's view and allow Gibson to slip into frame to get his medium and close-up shots. For the final tanker crash, the scene was considered so potentially treacherous that the stunt driver was ordered not to eat any food for 12 hours before filming, in case he needed to be rushed into emergency surgery. For the shot of the mangled Max being airlifted on the gyrocopter, Gibson was flat on a plank extended out of a helicopter door. Dean Semler would later note that if the shot were filmed today, it would be done with digital assistance, like parts of Fury Road and Furiosa. While the gyrocopter itself was an actual working air vehicle, the filmmakers inevitably accepted its limitations, and a climactic scene in the script where the gyro captain would pick up the feral kid from the speeding tanker was cut due to safety concerns. Miller also made use of the locals while making Mad Max 2. Wes's motorcycle wheelie during the opening was performed by a Broken Hill resident with his girlfriend on the back, and not a dummy as fans have long speculated. The feral kid's backflip was actually performed by a local female gymnast, and those two captives strapped to the front of Humongous' speeding truck during the chase, well, no, those were just dummies, or what Semler called watermelons with wigs. Of course, not all Broken Hill residents were interested in the production. The local postal carrier interrupted the filming of the suspenseful chase finale by casually ignoring the road blockades in order to deliver the day's mail. As for the feral kid, a long circulating fan theory had suggested that he grows up to be Tom Hardy's Max in Fury Road. However, Miller has refuted this rumor, stating that he views the movies as a series of legends and doesn't get overly concerned with continuity. He was, however, inspired by the feral kid's story to make a Lord of the Flies type of movie about lawless children in the wild. He would then get the idea to have Max chaperone the kids and guide them towards salvation, and Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome was born. Mad Max 2 opened in Australia in December of 1981, before rolling out to the rest of the world during 1982, getting retitled to The Road Warrior in North America after the first movie didn't make quite the same impact as its international performance. The sequel earned a respectable $36 million and received acclaim for its jaw-dropping action and imaginative vision of the post-apocalypse, a style and setting that would influence countless creators that followed. Steven Spielberg was so impressed with The Road Warrior that he invited Miller to direct Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, arguably the best segment of Twilight Zone the movie. James Cameron has also stated his affinity for Mad Max 2 and has cited the movie as an inspiration for the Terminator and T2. Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, still kicks ass today, due to its unwavering authenticity with real cars, real crashes, and real explosions, and no green screen or digital augmentation. Thanks to the movie's narration, we know that the feral kid and his clan made it to the Northern Paradise. But filmmaker George Miller would inhabit the wasteland for 45 years and 5 movies, so far. Let's hope he's still got more guzzling in the tank.